Hey there, everybody, and welcome to today's presentation on secrets to survival. And today we're talking about disaster mental health. And this is a live presentation that is going out to all of those who've been impacted either directly or indirectly by Hurricane Helene. And I know a lot of people who were directly impacted may not have power or internet, so they're not getting this. Unfortunately, that's not something that I can really address right now. But having been through multiple disasters and having been through them as a survivor, as well as working in disaster mental health, I do have some background. And I think one of the mistakes a lot of people make early on is putting the cart before the horse. And when it comes to a disaster, it's important to recognize that people are needing to get their basic needs met first. They need food, they need shelter, they need clothing, they need to feel safe, they need medical care. And until they are physically stable, they're not going to pay attention to their mental health issues. They're not going to pay attention to their stress levels. They're not going to pay attention to if they're being irritable with other people because they are in a persistent state of fight or flight. And we need to recognize that people during this time are likely going to be irritable. They're likely going to behave more impulsively. And it's important that we don't take that personally. Most of what we're going to see in people's reactions right now have to do with them and their sense of powerlessness and the activation of their stress response that is causing them to act in their emotional mind instead of in their wise mind. Now, the disaster occurred, 72 hours ago, something like that. And for some, it's still ongoing, no doubt. And during this time, there's going to be a lot of shock and denial. Some people may not feel anything yet. They just want to fix it. They want to do something. They want to try to make it better. They want to realize, hopefully, that they're just going to wake up and it was all a bad dream and it didn't happen. Well, it did happen. So again, even this presentation may be a little bit early for a lot of people because they are not ready to focus on mental health issues. And on Wednesday, I'm going to be talking a lot about an integrated trauma-informed approach to disaster mental health and disaster recovery, because I think it's really important that we recognize people who've experienced trauma and powerlessness before are likely going to experience a re-traumatization or having those feelings triggered again. It may not even be a similar situation as to what happened to them in the past, but the sense of unsafeness and powerlessness and possibly abandonment is the same. So they may be having some of those feelings creep up. They may be experiencing increased stress. It's important for people who have physical health conditions to pay attention to their physical health. And I know that's really hard when everything is, kind of going to hell in a handbasket. It's hard to be mindful of your blood sugar, of your blood pressure, of whether you're eating, of whether you're overdoing it on caffeine, of whether you're getting enough sleep. But all of those things are important. And if you neglect those things, then you are definitely going to start experiencing worsened physical health, which means it's going to be harder for you to cope physically, emotionally, interpersonally, etc., with what's going on. As outsiders, if you will, people who may not have been directly impacted, we also need to recognize some of the thoughts that are going through the minds of people who are in the thick of this right now, because not only did they lose power, a lot of places, a lot of counties don't have any potable water right now. And it's important to recognize that. The water treatment plants got completely destroyed by the floods, so they don't have water to flush their toilet, let alone to drink. That's a problem. We need to recognize that the roads to get in and out of many cities and towns in eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina, those roads are gone. So the trucks that used to deliver supplies to their grocery stores, to their hardware stores, to their Walmarts, those trucks can't get through. And it's going to be a long while before those trucks can get through. And those people can't get out. We're going to see businesses having to shut down. We're going to see people losing their jobs. People who were farmers, for example. In Tennessee, there was a wide swath of farmland that was completely obliterated. So people who have multi-generational farms, for example, whose entire family history has been this farm, they're struggling with that loss right now. And again, they are probably still in shock. And the totality of everything probably has not set in quite yet. They're probably still kind of looking at it in disbelief, going, what the heck just happened? And that's okay. People will get to that place. People will start to heal in their own time. And again, on Wednesday, I'm going to talk about what I call trauma triage, and people who have had similar experiences in the past or who feel some sort of similarity to the victims may experience more stress than people who are like, oh, they're nothing like me. People who lived in that area have never experienced, to the best of my knowledge, something quite to this degree of catastrophe and flooding in that area. So they're, back when Katrina happened, they're looking at it going, oh my gosh, that must be awful. Glad I live up here where it's safe. And now all of a sudden they're not feeling safe. And that is really unsettling, to say the least, for a lot of people. Places in Florida had really just started drying out and starting to rebuild after the last flooding that occurred like a month ago. And they got hit hard. There are cities and towns in Florida that were completely decimated. I know there are Columbia County, which is a very large, relatively populous county in Columbia County. Last I heard, they still didn't have phone service, cell phone service, internet, or electricity in a lot of places throughout the county. Think about it. How attached we are to our mobile devices. If we didn't have that, think about how attached we are to being able to go down to the grocery store. If we didn't have that, how would you feel? A lot of people are just kind of paralyzed because they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go next. I don't know what the next best step is to take. And that's what we're here for, is to help people figure out what the next step might be for them in order to start getting back to some sense of personal power, some sense of safety. And I'm not going to say normalcy. It's going to be a long time before there's any sort of normalcy. But it will come back. I lived through Andrew. I worked a 17 county Hurricane Katrina recovery grant. And I did some critical incident debriefing for a spate of tornadoes we had here in Middle Tennessee a couple years back. So I'm familiar with different disasters, and I didn't expect it to take the turn that it did. So there were a lot of people that were caught unawares, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault that they were caught unawares, but there's a lot of shoulda, coulda, woulda that's going on. And that can be some of the most toxic stuff happening in people who are well, not even survivors, but in everybody. You can't know what it was like for them. So we can't armchair quarterback sitting over here in Nashville. I can't armchair quarterback what somebody in Greenville was thinking or doing because I wasn't there. But a lot of times we rely on our weather forecasters, we rely on emergency management. And in this case, um, they got it wrong. And we didn't expect it to take that turn. So shoulda, coulda, woulda, not helping. The looky-loos, as my mother used to call them, are also not helpful. The people who just want to post video after video on YouTube and Twitter and share images of disaster help, or they may just be trying to get clicks. But for people who are living through the disaster, it is traumatizing to go online and just see it in your face over and over and over again. So I encourage people to leave, if they've got social media, if they've got internet right now, to limit the amount of time that they're on the news, that they are in social media, to focus on being mindful, focus on those around them, and trying to create that environment that we've talked about so many times before that's consistent. Get back to some sort of routine. Getting up about the same time, even if you don't have work to go to, getting up about the same time, eating about the same times, going to bed about the same times. I know that sounds weird, but it actually is really helpful for your autonomic nervous system and your circadian rhythms to keep that schedule that you used to have during the day. If you used to get up and go to work at 8 o'clock and work till 4:30 or something, during the day, you need to get up, get dressed, and do something. Stay productive, do something. So your brain is getting the same signals. Even if you're not going to work, what can you do? Can you work out in the yard, cleaning up debris? Can you go over to a friend's house and, make lunch together or something? I don't know. But those are all things that we need to consider. It's important in the aftermath for people to be sensitive to their health and their mental health. But right now, I think most people are just trying to survive. My mother-in-law was further south in Florida when the hurricane hit, and they just got back to their house yesterday, maybe the day before. I can't remember. It all blurs together. But there was a ton of work to do, picking up sticks and debris and cleaning up after the storm. And she is older. She has always done gardening and, is always up doing things. She doesn't just sit around all day, but she's not used to going out in like 1,000,000-degree heat. I exaggerate, and picking up sticks for hours on end. And she admitted to me yesterday that she overdid it some. And I think it's important to realize that those sticks are going to be there tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. And if you don't get them cleaned up today, it's not really going to impact anything. And yes, the grass is going to grow and eventually you'll have to mow, but you've got time. You don't need to clean it up in one single day. Pitching in to help your neighbors can also be helpful for each of you. So nobody overdoes it. Everybody's helping everybody else and kind of reining each other in. But it can also provide a sense of community and empowerment. You're working together to do something in your little corner of the universe. And that's a good thing. It can promote positivity among community members. So that's one benefit to pitching in. It helps people stay busy so they stay out of their own heads. That's another benefit to pitching in and volunteering during this cleanup process. Now, obviously, you want to stay out of the way of the FEMA workers and the disaster workers and everything. But there are a lot of people who are in the outskirts of where that disaster stuff happened, that they still have a lot of stuff to clean up and a lot of debris. So it's going to be a neighborhood coordinated effort. But again, it'll help them stay out of their heads so they're not ruminating on all the things they think should have been done. They're not ruminating on the anger, the guilt, the resentment, the anxiety about what's to come. They're using their energy to proactively do something in the moment. And that's where mindfulness can be really, really helpful. And for those of you who are in here, I encourage you to ask questions about disaster mental health and secrets to survival after a disaster, because that's what we're here for. At this point, I'm just sharing random tidbits, but I am here to answer your questions about disaster survival. And in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, it's important that we try to remain mindful of the present moment. We can't change the past. It happened. Can't change it. Can't do anything different. We can learn, so next time we do something different, but we can't change it. We can't anticipate the future. There's too many variables out there right now. What we can do is focus on the present. What do we have that's important in our rich and meaningful life in the present? And a lot of people kind of shirk at the word gratitude, but it is one word that we can use. Yes, we can acknowledge all the crappy stuff that's happening right now. And life is not a bed of roses. I get it. I hear you for a lot of reasons. Life is not a bed of roses. However, we also have to recognize should have done or shouldn't have done. What did they do? What do you have? What can you focus on that helps balance out the negativity? In Eastern medicine, they often talk about yin and yang and the balance of the dark and the light. And it's important that we maintain balance. When we are in a stress state, when we're experiencing distress, when we're in fight or flight, we are really focusing on the negative. And our brain is programmed to pay attention to the threats when we're feeling vulnerable and not pay attention to the positive things. We need to intentionally use our brain, use our mind, and turn our attention to acknowledge the positive. Okay, I'm well aware of the negative. Let me spend a minute focusing on the positive to help balance it out, to help me recognize there are still some things I have control over. There are still some things I can change. There are still some things I can do. There are still some ways I am safe. Maybe not in all the ways I wanted. However, focusing on those things that are important. Hello, Ty, and welcome. I'm glad you are here. I hope you are safe and in a place where you are able to continue to move forward towards your rich and meaningful life. I know a lot of people are feeling really stuck and really lost right now, and that's okay. On the topic of feeling lost is okay. When your entire world gets turned upside down and shaken 6 times till Sunday, makes sense that you're going to feel a little bit lost, which goes back to mindfulness, taking a step back and saying, okay, all right, let me take stock. Let me take inventory of what's real. What do I actually still have? And what do I not have? What power do I still have? And what do I not have? What motivations do I still have? And what do I not have? Taking stock so we don't feel like we lost everything, it's hopeless, and there's no chance of recovery. That is very extreme thinking. Yeah, there are some things that are not going to be recovered. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. But there are some things that we can recover. It'll take time. It'll take a long time. I'm not talking a week. I'm not talking a month. I'm talking this time next year. Hopefully people are starting to feel like they've gotten back into the routine of new normalcy. And it'll take that long to start rebuilding, to start feeling safe again, to start figuring out how to prevent this in the future. What other questions do people have about disaster mental health? And Ty, I don't know where you are on the West Coast, but I know out there, y'all have fires. We have floods, y'all have fires. And they are no less devastating than the floods. I mean, they have an immense impact on towns and communities and services that are available. So that is something that I know you are familiar with. You're familiar with what might be going on out here if you've been exposed to those things. I will do another video on dementia. We do have a couple videos on communicating with the cognitively impaired and dementia and the diagnosis of dementia on the website or on the YouTube channel, but I will consider doing another one in the future. Yes. So does anybody have any other questions that pertain to disaster mental health and disaster recovery? Because that's where people are at this point. There's a significant portion of the country that has been impacted either directly or indirectly by this hurricane. And we don't want to minimize that. I will talk briefly about children. Remember, children have difficulty differentiating what's going on outside their door from what's going on 600 miles away. So wherever you're at, thank you very much, first name, last name. I appreciate the support. It's important to help children recognize that they are safe. And even if they were exposed to the flooding or the hurricane or whatever aspect of it they were exposed to, help them recognize that they're safe now. Young children also have difficulty understanding if they keep seeing something on TV, in their mind, it's still happening. And they have difficulty understanding that it's just the TV or the news or Twitter or whatever replaying the same thing that happened 3, 4, 5 days ago. We need to clarify that for children, and ideally don't expose them to it, especially your younger children, your elementary school age and younger children. Try not to expose them to repeated reports of what's going on so they can recognize, or so they can not be confused about whether it's still ongoing or if they're safe in the moment. Golgi Baby asks, how does one approach expectation management as clients go through the grief process after a crisis? Example, Maui wildfires have been passed over a year ago. It's been touchy to facilitate moving on. Yes, it is important to empathize with where someone is at. And they're going to go through the grieving process at their own pace. One of the first things they need to do is start feeling safe and empowered again, because that was extremely traumatic. And a lot of people felt very betrayed and very angry about what happened. And processing that anger, not trying to get people to acceptance and moving on yet, but really, let's stick with this anger. Let's stick with this feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, powerlessness, of depression, wherever they're at. Tell me about that. What are you angry about? And then talking about strategies. Well, first talking about what that feeling means and acknowledging that feeling and empowering them to let it go when they're ready. Telling them that it's time to move on is taking their power away again. Even though it may be the healthy thing to do, there's still something. Remember, behavior's communication, and there's still some reason that they are afraid to let that go, that they're not willing to let that go. And we need to explore that. It may have to do with the fires themselves or with the disaster itself, which I would guess 50, 60% of the cases, that's true. And in the other 40 or 50% of the cases, it may have to do with that trauma, reopened old wounds that they're not even aware of yet. And they haven't processed the anger with those wounds. And they're just feeling like they're drowning in anger, in powerlessness. I do a deep dive. That's what I do. And everybody has their different approaches. I tend to do a deep dive with people to help to identify what thoughts are you having about this event, about the fires, about what you lost, about whatever. Let's talk about those thoughts and let's evaluate their accuracy in the present moment. Let's evaluate how holding on to this anger is helping you move toward or keeping you from moving toward your rich and meaningful life. I develop goals with them that are mutually agreeable for them. I want them potentially to move on to acceptance and let go of the grief. That's what I want. I hate seeing people grieve, but they're not ready. Okay. So what is it that you're coming to counseling? What is it that you're willing to work on? What is it that you're willing to do in order to move towards your rich and meaningful life? What is it that I can help you with? And maybe leave the grief thing alone for a little while if they're not ready to let it go. There are a lot of reasons people may not want to let go of grief. They may feel disloyal. They may be afraid it will happen again. They may be afraid that they're going to forget. They may be still holding on to that anger and doing the blame thing, whether they're feeling guilty and blaming themselves or blaming other people. And they're afraid that if they quit blaming, they won't be on high alert anymore, and they're going to be vulnerable. They may fear that if they let their guard down, if they quit being angry, that they're going to be too vulnerable again. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. EMDR can be really helpful for people who are still having nightmares, still having flashbacks, still having PTSD type symptoms. You can also look in the DSM-5 TR at prolonged grief disorder. That may be appropriate at this time for some of those people, not to pathologize it, but merely to be able to continue to help them and bill for services. I hate to make it sound that way, but that's reality. In terms of expectation management, it's also important to explore the realities of their expectations. Do they expect somebody to take responsibility? Well, that probably ain't going to happen. Do they expect somebody to, what do they expect and how likely is it? And if that doesn't happen, how does that impact their ability to use their energy to move toward their rich and meaningful life? If somebody doesn't take responsibility for what happened, does that prevent them from moving forward? If they have to move, they hoped they'd be able to rebuild and they expected they'd be able to rebuild, quickly. And it's just, it's one delay after another. Okay, well, we can either manage expectations on the timeline, or we can explore, are there other avenues? If you want to rebuild and restart, are there other avenues besides rebuilding right here that you might take a look at? Yeah, there's a lot of expectations for us here after the flooding. Expectations that we're going to have food on grocery store shelves in a lot of places, as readily as we did before, probably not really realistic. So people need to prepare and, not get angry at Kroger or Publix or Walmart because they're out of things, because the shelves are semi-bare. They're doing the very best they can and managing those expectations so people aren't shocked and feeling again unsafe again if they walk into the grocery store and there's no toilet paper or no milk or whatever it is. Managing their expectations is going to be really important. And that's actually a way to help them regain a sense of personal power. If I have these expectations that are unrealistic and I'm constantly running into situations where I'm being disappointed because my expectations are being let down, then that's going to compound my feelings of powerlessness and unsafeness. If I have reasonable expectations, then when those expectations are met, I'm like, okay, not exactly what I wanted, but it's going to work. People may have had the expectation they were going to be able to stay in their homes, and now they're in shelters. Okay, it sucks. I've been in shelters before. I understand. However, managing expectations for, all right, my expectation was, or my need is to be safe. I have safety right now. So what are my minimum expectations? What are my needs right now versus my wants? And that can be another thing to look at. So I went off on several different tangents there, but it's a very meta-concept-y thing when we talk about managing expectations. And I actually probably ought to do an entire video on that because it is an excellent question about how to do it and why it's important for people. It definitely is important to make sure that we are paying attention to what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're doing, and checking for reliability, checking for validity. There are a lot of scamsters out there. Again, having grown up in Florida, I'm familiar with this. Every time a hurricane came through, and we do need to protect ourselves and trust but verify, I guess, is one of those things that we can look at. In terms of trauma diagnosis bond, that's a great follow-on. What we're looking at right now, right after a disaster, is acute stress disorder in people. They're not going to develop or be able to be diagnosed with PTSD for several more weeks. And hopefully a lot of people won't move to that. But acute stress disorder is what we're looking at. We have a state of high autonomic activity. People are in that fight or flight place, which means their sleep is going to be impaired, which means their gut microbiome is going to be impaired, which means their body's ability to absorb the foods that they eat will be impaired. And all of that is going to contribute to mood disturbances as well as cognitive brain fog, difficulty concentrating, and other cognitive issues, increased ruminations, etc. Recognizing the symptoms of trauma as reactions or behavioral or physical manifestations of that autonomic nervous system, of that fight or flight response being hyperactivated, is really important. Understanding that behavior has meaning and behavior makes sense. When we look at the DSM-5 TR, we can see some of these symptoms like hypervigilance. Well, after somebody goes through a situation that leaves them feeling unsafe and powerless, like the disasters, it makes sense that they're not going to be relaxed. They're going to be scanning. They're going to be looking for another shoe to drop. That's what we do. They are in a situation right now where they may not feel safe. Things are still up in the air. They still are without power. They're without water, what have you. So they're still in that state of vulnerability, and they're going to be more protective. Whenever anybody, animal, human, whatever, whenever you're feeling vulnerable, you tend to be more hypervigilant to protect yourself from additional threats that may come your way. Irritability is a very common symptom in acute stress disorder, PTSD. When we are in fight or flight, hence fight, we have a tendency to be more irritable, a tendency to be more defensive, a tendency to be trying to protect ourselves more, a tendency to be more impulsive because we are in our emotional mind. We're in our, fix it. Let's just do what we need to do to get safe mind instead of our thinking mind. It's also important to recognize that when people are in fight or flight, that they have more difficulty remembering what happened. When we're in our emotional mind, we interpret things based on emotional reasoning. I feel scared, therefore there must be a threat. Well, there actually may not be a threat. I may be feeling scared because there were triggers that triggered memories of a time when I was unsafe, but that doesn't mean that I am necessarily unsafe right now. And understanding that emotional reasoning is also important in understanding why people have the symptoms they do. Why do they withdraw? Well, if they were in a traumatic event, especially if it involved another person, then they may not want to hang out with other people because it reminds them that other people are potentially unsafe. It may be their way of trying to protect themselves. Avoidance of reminders. Reminders are triggers. Triggers open up that Pandora's box and cause those memories to come flooding back, both the cognitive memories, the emotional memories, and the somatic memories, the body memories of what happened. And that's overwhelming. So yeah, makes sense. You're going to avoid reminders of the event because you certainly don't want to remember it. And I try to help people recognize the functional nature of their symptoms to depathologize what's going on. It's a normal reaction to a really abnormal, unfortunate, awful situation. Do you have any other questions? And I will see about doing another video on dementia, as well as a video on expectation management. Those sound like interesting videos, and I know I don't have a bunch of them on that particular topic. I am going to try to show up and do these lives every day at noon for the next few days to see if there's anything that people need in response to coping after the disaster. And if we don't have a lot of attendance and participation, then I'll quit doing it. But if we start having a lot of people drop in, I will continue doing that. There's also I'm going to type this into the chat window here. T.me/Doc Snipes support is a chat room that I open for people who are recovering after the disaster, and it's really targeted at people who've been directly or indirectly stressed or traumatized, affected by the disaster. So I encourage you, if you know somebody who's struggling, maybe their loved one still hasn't gotten in contact with them, or the place that they got married was just completely leveled, and, losing those memories is devastating to them. However it's impacting them, give them that address, tell them to drop in. We're trying to keep it staffed about 16 hours a day right now to meet the needs of anybody who's at that point that they are noticing their mental distress because they've gotten their basic physical needs met. All right, everybody, have a great day.